Welcome back to Through the Veil with Elle and Camille. I'm Camille.
I'm Elle.
And today we are interviewing my very good friend, Sean Marshall. We go way back. Sean, do you want to explain how we know each other?
Sure. We met, geez, I don't know, 15 years ago, more, a long time, um, back in Orange County in California, and we were in the same congregation at church together. And I think my first impression of Camille was there's a teacher, a Sunday school teacher, sharing this thing, and it was a little interesting. And then I hear this voice in the background go, "No, I don't think that's true." And I was like, who is this girl? I love her. And
That's
so,
real.
because it was off, it just wasn't right. And she had no problem calling him out, like in front of everybody. And he's like, "Oh, well, yeah, maybe we do need to re-examine." I was like, and then her husband, Jeff, spoke like the following Sunday, and he had this hilarious thing about his knee and soccer and everything. And I'm like, Heidi, my wife Heidi, I was like, we got to get to know this couple. And then we've just been in touch ever since. So
Yeah, good
yeah, so
times.
share
Good
your
times.
opinion. It might create a blossom of friendship, because there might be somebody else that responds to that opinion really well.
I don't know. I think I was less filtered back then.
No, I think you're still probably pretty open. You're open.
There we go.
Well, those that have ears to hear will hear. So
Right.
yeah,
Hence this podcast.
Here we
yeah.
are.
I am not in touch with that Sunday school teacher, yet I am in touch with you. So
Right. That's
There
true.
you go.
So we asked Sean to be here today because he has written more than a trilogy. It's 4 books now, but the trilogy plus kind of an extra backstory book that focuses on the angels we have on the other side, loved ones who've passed on, or maybe that have not come yet to live on Earth, who are part of our support team or our spirit team on the other side.
the first book is about this hotshot 27-year-old single guy that thinks he's so cool, has his own, team of guardian angels. But then the second book, and there's a girl in the book, but then in the second book, it's about the girl and her side of what's going on at the same time. So, and then the third book so the first book is his story, second book is her story, same timeline. And then the third book is like their story 10 years, in the future. And what may or may not happen with their family.
When did you publish your first book? It's been a while now.
Yeah, it was let me look at the official date, 2019.
Show us your book.
Yeah.
I want to see it.
Oh,
It's not
geez.
that long ago.
Council of Angels. And
This
you
is the
see
first
cover of
one,
the
and then
ocean
there's
or
more. Oh yeah, surfing.
Mhm.
And then I realized there's a lot more to the story, so I wrote a second part, and then I was like, there's still more that needs to come out. So I wrote the third one, and then I was like, people just diving into all these novels might be a bit much. So I was like, how about a prequel? And so I wrote a prequel, and this one's just a small one, but it kind of gives you
Novella.
novella. It sets it up, and then I realized there's still one more. It's like all of those mom stories where you hear like, there's still one more baby that needs to come to our family. I was like, there's still one more book that needs to come. And so it's actually more like this. There's one that's going to be right here. It's all
Uh-huh.
fuzzy, but and I'm working on that. I'm going to finish that ASAP because
Very cool.
it's my favorite and I really like it. But yeah, it's not done yet, but it's already my favorite. So yeah.
Coming.
I actually want to dive into that question of Elle and I are both creative people. She's an artist. She's a painter.
And an author. I actually
Yeah.
also write.
Oh yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm musical and I write, and there's sort of this process where you start to create something and it takes on a life of its own. How
It's
have
true.
you experienced that with these books? Like, you had this idea. Do you feel like God or the other side was peppering you with motivation along the way or ideas?
Inspiration.
How did that?
Objection leading the witness, but yes, to answer your question, absolutely. So I'm kind of a weirdo. I mean, with writers, there's like the pantsers or the plotters. Like people either outline or they just go by the seam of their pants and just let the characters determine the story, and then they go back and kind of. I'm too chicken to just let the characters do that. But with the first book, it's actually a super long story. It's what I wanted to do. It's what I've always wanted to do. And when my wife and I were first married 20 years ago, I was actually working for an artist. His name was Wyland, and he's the guy that paints like big
Oh,
whales on the sides of walls and everything. And working for an artist who was making like a really good income, his career, living his dream. It was like super inspiring for me. And so I thought, well, what's my dream? What's my creative outlet? And it's writing. It always has been. But I just chickened out for so long. And then our first baby came along, Abigail, and I just thought I've got to be responsible and make money and the whole thing, and just kind of lost it for a while until the time came. We were actually in Spain at the time, and we were on a bus, and we were just kind of thinking about what to do and praying about kind of the next chapter. And I pulled up this story that I'd written in that our first year of marriage, and I showed it to my wife, and she just starts crying. She's like, "You need to write." And it's kind of like that scene in Rocky 2, if you guys have seen that, when Rocky doesn't want to fight, and Adrian, she has the baby, but she kind of goes into the coma. She wakes up, and then she's like, "I want you to do me a favor." And Rocky's like, "What?" And she's like, "Win." And he's like, "Okay." He's got the permission of his wife, and he's like, "Yeah," and it's like, montage and everything. And that was that moment for me. And I was like, cool, now I got to figure out how to write a novel. And so anyways, figured out like I prefer outlining, but and to answer your question, as I was writing this, I realized there's a lot more that was like coming. So it wasn't me. And my personal feeling is that when you're creating, you're kind of the medium, and it's God wanting to manifest himself through you. Like you are the hands. But the heart and the head and the hands, if they're all in line, you produce this massive, amazing work that resonates with people. So
Yeah.
I feel fortunate that like at least the first book, well, I've got stories about these books, and I think they relate to this, but I haven't done much to get them out. I was kind of waiting for the last one, and then I'll start the marketing and all that, which is always its own like weird thing. Artists are really great at creating the work, but selling the work or sharing it,
Yeah.
that's like harder. It's like, but I've already got enough experiences with the handful of people that I've shared this with that it resonates with them. So I feel like it's almost like my duty, my calling, my mission to get this out
Get
to more
that.
people. This
Right.
message, which is perfectly in line with what you're doing.
Hmm.
To answer your question, yes, there was definitely more that came through than what I had outlined. In fact, I would only outline the scene and then kind of like
Let
wing
it
it. And
go.
I'm like, oh yeah, that's good. And then maybe have to go back and tweak some things to make that something back make sense, but it worked.
I think it harkens back to a sense of divine nature. You know, as human beings, we are essentially created and creative. It is something within our very spiritual construct, being children of the great creator, right? And so I don't know, I think out of all of the creatures on the planet, we are unique kind of in this capacity. And I totally agree with you that there is some kind of alignment sometimes that just occurs when inspiration, and think about the word inspiration itself, like where does that come from? The thin air. Like there's nothing that we can substantiate or measure with inspiration. It's something that hits and produces and inspires, uplifts, brings light to things, and that in itself is the definition of God.
I wanted to ask too, what made you interested in writing books about this topic in the first place? Like, that's not the most common fictional topic, right? It's usually romance, which,
I know.
how did you start with an idea of,
Deadpan. I know.
Well, I said I only know it because like one of the editors who worked on it, I was like, well, what genre is this? And she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, you're a literary like agent, you're supposed to know this stuff. And she's like, Christian romance? I'm like, yeah, but I don't really mention Jesus Christ necessarily. I don't mind, but I want, anybody to be able to pick this book up and feel like God, angels resonates with me, whether they're a Buddhist or Jewish or Muslim. It doesn't matter. And so she's like, yeah, maybe not Christian romance. Anyways, but I'll tell you, it was serving a mission for my church, and I was in El Salvador, and it was for 2 years. So I wrote letters every week to my parents, and it started getting pretty monotonous. And so then I just would start getting creative. Like one week I wrote about the worms that had vacated my body, that were in my body and then vacated. And it was point of view of a week in the life with Sean, and what that was like, and they loved it. And then this idea of me sitting down with this kind of like this council room, this circular table with these angels all around. And I'm sitting there, and one's like my physical angel, like he is in charge of my physical well-being, and then there's my spiritual angel, and she was in charge of my spiritual well-being, and then there was, all these different angels. I even had a sense of humor angel. And but and then so then my parents got this, basically the minutes of this council meeting with Sean, and it was this guy named Michael, which happens to be my first name, but I go by my middle name Sean. But so Michael is the secretary angel, and he wrote the minutes, and he accidentally sent those to my parents. And then the following week, it was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, David and Sue Marshall. I'm so sorry I accidentally sent you those minutes. But hey, while I've got you, I might as well catch up on what happened with Sean this past week." And they loved it. It was a hit. And so I thought, man, that's an interesting concept. What if you could really have a council of angels? Like, you could sit down, maybe a boardroom setting, maybe you're sitting on the beach, maybe you're sitting on surfboards in a circle, like, what would that be like to be able to talk to these angels as they give you different points of view on your life? And I just thought that was a powerful concept, stuck with me. And it wasn't until that, that rocky moment when my wife's like, "You need to write," that I was like, this is the first thing I'm writing. This is the thing I need to write.
In a Christian backdrop, we obviously have a lot of support for the notion of angels, but we talk a lot about this on this podcast, how, you know, sometimes the things that we believe don't translate fully into like the way we practice our faith. And so, like, angels as a council, that's fantastic. What a novel concept, pun intended. But when you actually come to the belief part of it, it does seem something that's fantastical. Is this a concept, had you ever had any experiences, or is this a concept that you like put stock in, faith in? Like, could this be something that you believed feasibly could happen, or was this solid fantasy for you while you were writing this?
Yes, I believe it as a reality, to answer simply. And I do feel it crosses cultures. So there's a scene in Mulan, the Disney cartoon, right, where the dragon is basically her ancestors are concerned for her, and they send this little dragon to go be her little
Mushu.
guardian. Yeah, Mushu, to be her guardian angel. And I'm not gonna lie, that stuff, it gets me choked up, And then there's this scene at the end of Gladiator, like, there's all these different things, even in just fiction, where he's pushing open the door and he sees his wife and kid, and I'm like, I get emotional at that, and I realize, and I've had a couple of personal experiences myself that have, I have made me realize this is a true thing, or it's my experience that this is true, and it is beneficial to my life, as well as even imaginary. So there's this book called, it's Napoleon Hill, the Act and Think and Grow Rich, and he talks about having this imaginary council. And maybe that's part of where this idea, no, it wasn't, because I came up with this idea before. But anyways, I came across this idea. He had this imaginary council of these figures, I think like Thomas Edison and Abraham Lincoln, all these figures that he wanted to learn from. He would have sit in like a boardroom kind of thing, or I forget what his particular thing, but he would like meditate, relax, and these figures would come into the room, and each one of them kind of had a personality, and they would give him advice. And they would come out of that, whatever it was, meditation, vision, whatever you want to call it. But it was real tangible stuff that he could take into the world that was wisdom and helped him be a better person. So imaginary, not either way, the outcome, the net gain was positive. To be clear, I don't personally have my own council of angels that I sit around weekly and report back in with, how's physical? Oh, you did 20 push-ups this week, great job, and whatever. But boy, would that be nice, and maybe I should examine that a little bit more, and maybe have my own mental spiritual council. I know exactly who would be on my council. My mother and my grandmother would both absolutely be on there. But yeah.
I think whether we're aware of them or not, they're about doing their business
Yeah.
behind the scenes.
Yeah, like a bee buzzing behind the scenes, just busy. And you don't always notice the bees around. Like, they're small and they just kind of do their work. They don't need to be noticed. I also want to say, we talked about earlier how sometimes when you're creating something, it takes on a life of its own. I think also when we're creating things that have a spiritual nature, we don't always realize the impact it has on other people. We put it
Right.
out there and we're like, oh, I think it's pretty good. But then we're not really in charge of what God does with that product and how he causes it to influence someone else's life. We don't always know what that impact is, and God's working through it to create that. I had an experience when I was reading, I believe it was Sean's second book in the trilogy, where it was a very spiritual, personal experience where I had this awareness instantly of somebody on the other side of the veil, that existed for me that I had not been aware of before, a child that had yet to be a part of my life. And it was really interesting because I wasn't expecting it, you know? I was reading the book to enjoy it and to just, fantasy fiction is an escape and it's fun. And I wasn't reading the book with the intention to have a personal spiritual experience, but God had that in store for me. And I didn't know. And it was really profound. You never know what impact your work will have. So you just got to do it and put it out there and let God do the rest.
Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. That's part of why I feel, just because of the small amount, the handful of experiences that people have shared with me, that's why I feel like, okay, Sean, get through whatever you're going through, your little depression or whatever it is, and just hurry and get
Midlife
this
crisis
stuff out there. Yeah, it's over now. But I will say honestly, like kind of in 2020, when the world kind of went through this nightmare, that kind of kickstarted my own kind of thing. And then I had already started on these books, and then it's like, I got to finish this, and it just took forever. But finally, it's like I've had enough people reach out and share, hey, you owe me a box of Kleenex, or different things like that. But even more impactful, so actually, with the second book, the girl Skylar, she kind of has some issues with her parents. And I have a friend, her name is Jolynn. She's lives in Scotland. And I'll tell you real fast. But with this very first book, we were living in Scotland, and I had a whole bunch of extra copies, and we were about to leave. And so, they have the cool double-decker buses there. And so I took this book and I put a note in it, and I said, hey, and I left it on the bus. But the note said, hey, if you find this book, it's yours free. I left it here on purpose, but just read it and let me know what you thought, whether you hated it or you loved it. Either way, I just want to see if this social
Clever
experiment
marketing
works,
device there.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. I
nice.
should just start leaving them on all the buses everywhere. But we got back to the States, and I'm sitting there checking my email, and I see this email, and I'm reading it, and it was just like chills. It was unbelievable. But it is, long story short, this woman in Scotland, in Edinburgh, found the book, said she had wanted to get back into reading anyway and get off to social media. And then when she saw that it was free and I was giving it to her, it like blew her mind. And then the fact that it was about angels like struck a nerve with her. And she said that, and it's hard to even repeat. I almost feel like I have to read the email because it sounds so unbelievable. But it was basically like she feels like she would be going through something in her life, and the book would call out to her, and she would read something in the book, and that would directly help her, figure out something in her life. She said she loved it. And then I sent her a copy of the second book when that came out. Super long story short, she said, Sean, you're not going to believe this, but her dad lives in Barbados or Trinidad, I think, and she's never really known him. But after the story of Skylar and kind of how she may or may not resolve stuff with her parents, she felt inspired to reach out to her father. And super long story short, she tracks him down, finds his phone number, calls him, and they have a discussion. She's in Scotland, he's in Trinidad, and he's like, well, do you know what day it is today? And she's like, no, I don't really know anything about you. No. And he's like, today's my birthday. And she said he was so excited that she had reached out, and she has a son too, and he's never met her son. And so he was going to fly her and her son to come meet him and hang out. And I'm like, that is a real life relationship. And I'm not saying it's all happily ever after, but it's a real life, something physical that really happened in real life as a result of just reading a story that I happened to write.
I did study writing and I did study painting at school, and I had this constant war in my head of my father's voice telling me, like, you gotta do something practical, you gotta do something real world and something productive. And I would battle myself with, like, well, what purpose does creativity serve? What purpose does writing a fictional story about someone who never really existed actually benefit in societies? It's just escapism. Like, it's fluff, right? It's fluff. And what I kind of came to over the course of like examining my life, examining literature, studying, the great novelists, is that it's inspiration. And oftentimes, what it is going to do is suspend those dark voices in our head just long enough to inspire us and open our hearts and open our minds to a context of possibility we haven't yet considered. And so often doing that, we have grand realizations about things that we never considered before, like Camille's story, or like the story with this woman who it like basically changed her life and opened a door to something that she had never even given space to before. Because I think it's like building blocks. Every time we're exposed to something that uplifts or gives good light or something, it's getting added to a block in our influences in our lives. And those influences build up to something over the course of time. They're going to change the whole trajectory that we're headed because we think differently. We feel differently. We've opened our hearts to a context that never existed before.
Sometimes I think that
Right.
fiction teaches lessons better than nonfiction because
Right.
it's hidden and it's like the nuance and it's expansive spiritually, mentally, emotionally. I've had some really profound spiritual experiences watching a movie or listening to music that just
Right.
lifts my soul. And I think it is the work of God. You know, God is a creator and he gives us that same ability to create and he influences us as we do it.
Well, even Jesus taught through parable, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
These were stories. They didn't have any actual real context that he was sharing. They were stories, and yet they changed the whole course of human history.
You've spent like 5 years living in Cozumel about at this time, right? 5 or 6.
Yeah.
How does their culture differ in ours as far as gifts through the veil? Like, did they? I mean, I know I have some stories where people have opened up about like being a dreamer, right? Having that spiritual
Hmm.
gift. But what have you experienced living there?
Well, so many of my friends in Mexico are, I feel like in our culture in particular, we get a little bit too more in our heads. We're civil engineers and we're
Mhm.
dutiful and all of that. And maybe we get too much in our heads. Whereas a lot of my Latin friends, my Mexican friends, they tell me about these extraordinary dreams that they've had or visions. Or my friend told me that he had had this amazing dream. And when he walked across the property of a church one time, he's like, this is it. This is my home. This is where I'm supposed to be. And he knew that because of a dream he had had like 5 years prior.
Wow.
And so I feel like they're very, this is generally stereotypical, but like, at least compared to gringos, right? Very much more in touch with their soul and visions and dreams are reality. And they're not like, oh, that's cute. Oh, that's a fun story. But it's like, oh, you need to take that seriously. I think in Mexican culture, especially Dia de los Muertos is a big deal. Like a lot of like for Americans, we're like, oh, that's like a second Halloween. It's like, no, it's not Halloween at all. It's not like dressing up and scaring the ghosts away. You know, it's actually probably literally one of my favorite holidays when you truly understand that it's remembering your ancestors who've moved on. And for like a week, everywhere, even at like the movie theater, they have these tables with ofrendas, like
Yeah.
offerings, right? Like the picture candle. And they'll often put out like that person's, like your abuelita, your grandma's favorite meal. And so there's like a plate with food just kind of sitting there for a week. It's a little weird, but it's so that grandma can come and partake and get recharged and be there with her descendants. And when you really think about that holiday, it's powerful.
Outside of that European context, I feel like there are many, many cultures that take this connection with loved ones through the veil specifically, but also like spirituality and spiritual gifts in a much more realistic context than we allow it. It's like it's a little too far-fetched sometimes in mainstream like above board Western culture. But in the below subtext, we have a lot of mysticism as well. But we write that off as mysticism, right? Whereas a lot of other cultures, this is part of their religion, it's part of their spirituality, it's part of their cultural context. In Asia, they have a very similar holiday, and they do very similar things with the offerings of the food on the tables and stuff for their ancestors and their loved ones, and they leave it out, and you don't touch it for like several days, and it stays. And they even burn money for their loved ones to use in the afterlife. People buy these huge stacks of paper money, and they just light them up on the street, and they burn it, and they do firecrackers, and it's a whole huge thing. And then they have another holiday, which is it's a grave sweeping holiday, where they all go out to their grave sites of their loved ones. And traditionally, at least in Taiwan and Chinese culture, they build like little mausoleums. They're like little houses. And so
Hmm.
there's whole grave sites where they have these little houses, and they go in and they sweep it out, they clean it out, and they make this big celebration of like cleaning up the afterlife homes of their loved ones on the other side. And there's something beautiful about that literal memory. And in Asia, in Shinto and in a lot of the other Asian subtext religions, it's worshipful. They're worshiping their ancestors and stuff. But there is good in that context that we could also take in the veneration and the remembrance, because they're not gone with death. You had said something before we started recording about how like we kind of view death as like a cutoff. Like, it's over. We can't talk about them anymore. And I feel like that comes from like a very Victorian concept of like, shh, don't talk about the dead. We can't let them hear us. They're not gone just because they've exited life. I think we
Right.
can all
Yeah.
accept that.
In all the near death experiences I've read, people say, I didn't feel dead. I felt more alive. So let's not use the
Right.
word dead. It's not accurate.
Liberated.
So I've studied a lot of like in the near death experience and what's going on. And the one common theme I've seen across the board is everyone, they come back here and they're like, oh no, I want to go back. Like they get back crammed into this physical body, and with just five senses instead of like a million senses and a million colors, and colors being music, and emotions being sound, and all this stuff that's going on that we're like limited to. Like we're stuck in kindergarten, and there's this whole rest of this world that's happening. All these other, I don't know what you want to call it, realities, dimensions, whatever planes of existence, whatever you want to call it. But we kind of have ourselves boxed in. And then even more challenging sometimes is, I think, I kind of view God like we're a bunch of kindergartners in this classroom, and we're all telling each other what to do and what's right, and this is science and this is reality, and you're allowed to do this. And then there's other kindergartners that are off just playing, and then God must look at us and be like, I love them, but boy, are they dumb.
I
Like
relate to
But
that
cute.
so
there's the
much.
little bossy ones, and the little ones that want to be in charge of everybody else.
The
And
tattletales.
like,
My
The
5-year-old is
class
yeah,
one of the
president.
tattletales, and I
yeah,
volunteer in his classroom every Tuesday. And I'm going to go see those kindergartners again today, and they are so silly.
because of that, though, we limit ourselves to being open to that. And um, there is enough, I don't know what you want to call it, proof, at least experiences that are your reality, that are your own personality, personal reality, that help you know that there is more to this. This energy changes. It might be a different structure, but it's going on, it's moving on. And if that in turn can be beneficial to our lives and lift us up, then there's absolutely nothing
Negative.
mystical, or if you want to call it negative, like that. There's nothing wrong with that. If it starts to be destructive, and then obviously, but by their fruits you shall know them. If it's lifting them up, then that's only good, and it only helps people. There is kind of that line of, and this is something I'm trying to kind of explore myself, of like, is this a sacred experience? And if it's sacred, is it just for me, or is it something that I can share? Because if it's just for me, and it is just for me, if I do share it, oh, maybe I might get cut off from having more of those experiences. But then if it is an experience that I feel like I can share, then hopefully I get more of those too. Because I've had a couple of experiences myself, and I feel like they're really special. And I'm like, I want more.
This context that we tend to have, particularly in our own faith tradition, but also I think in Christianity, of like too sacred to share. And if I do share it, then I'm going to get cut off from God.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this a true principle though? Is it? I want to challenge that notion and really look at it, because I think, yes, there are some things that are meant just for us, and we should be respectful of those things. Is it a sin to share it? Even if it is meant just for you? I don't know. maybe even doesn't please God necessarily if it's just for you, but I don't think that cuts off further revelation unless he specifically has told you not to, right? And if we look at the body of context within like scriptures or I don't know, they're written because they are people's spiritual experiences
Mhm.
and they're meant to give and to share, right? And these things are meant for our benefit, but also multiple people's benefit. God is the master of one stone, many birds.
I agree. I don't think, and that's why I myself am kind of like exploring what this
Right,
means, and as always, in the end, I'm going to go guided by my feelings. You know,
Right.
right.
we've all been in those situations where someone's speaking in public and they start to share a little too much about
And you're like,
their marriage or something, and we're all kind of going, oh, you know,
yeah.
that's crossed the line, you know.
Right.
But then if someone starts to share something that's very personal and we're all feeling like uplifted, then it's like, well, that's from God. I don't like fear entering religion in any way because I feel like that's legacy religions. That's we're done. We should be done
Yeah,
with that. We should be done with
God's not
religion
fear.
and fear. Mm-mm.
I remember the first time I heard someone share publicly an experience with loved ones on the other side. I was probably in my early 20s and I was at church and I was like, why is she sharing all of this? This is kind of personal. And it made me feel uncomfortable because I I hadn't heard about the topic before. And now here I am 20 years later sharing my Through the Veil experiences on a podcast. But at that point, it planted a seed with me of like, huh, why would someone share that? That seems personal. And it kind of irked me, but it intrigued me at the same time. And later, as I started to have more experience through the veil, I was like, oh, these are real. And I think it irked me. I was a little jealous because I hadn't had any myself that I could really like
You
put
gotta
into
open yourself
words.
up first.
Right.
Yeah, it's a
And,
building block. You gotta build that wall with each one of those bricks.
right. And so I know that anybody who comes across this podcast might not be like, oh, this is for me. Some people might be like, why would people want to talk about that? That's weird or strange or too much. But for other people that have had plenty of experiences and need to have a place where they can place them, like, oh, I'm not the only one. What a relief. How nice. I think we're all in different places. And, you know, if you know, you know. And if you don't, then maybe scroll on. That being said, Sean, are there any thin veil experiences you'd like to share that are faith promoting that you feel comfortable sharing? Or have your books, even perhaps writing them, created more of those for you? Have you noticed the veil thinning as a result of writing books on this topic?
Well, I will tell you. So I'm jealous of all the people that seem to have the veil is very thin for them. I'm so jealous because I'll just tell you, I got a blessing one time that said that I would be able to do well, I would be able to do work for many of the people that I knew in the life before this. And so, and they will greet me with open arms when I pass beyond the veil. And I'm like, so wait, when I die, it's like a massive homecoming party. Like, woo, like I, I love my wife and kids, but like, and I don't want to die right now. But like, when the time comes for me to die, I'm like, yes, I can't wait. You know, I'm like, I'm excited. Like, you know, there's so much fear in the world, and I'm like, we are floating on a rock flying through space. Death can happen at any time. Like, and I'm excited for it personally, with a proper, healthy perspective, right? Let's make sure that I frame that properly. But to answer your question, one of the characters, an angel, her name is Mary, and she is modeled exactly after my grandma. And so my paternal grandmother, my dad's mom. But I will say my mom's mom. So my wife Heidi, her ring is actually my mom's mom. I called her Mama K. Mama K's, it's her wedding band and engagement ring. And my mom gave it to me thinking this, I think this should be for Heidi. And when the time came, it was Laguna Beach. It was like 2 a.m. because I kind of did this long drawn out engagement thing or proposal thing, made Heidi think I was going to propose her at Disneyland, but that's too cliche. So, you know, whatever. But it was in Laguna Beach, like Fisherman's Cove. The moon was so bright, and my brother had gone down and laid out a blanket with roses and the whole thing. And as I'm proposing to her and I'm giving her the ring, she says, yes, yay, happily ever after. But then I'm explaining to her about the ring, and I get all choked up. And I think Heidi's thinking, oh, yeah, he's proposing. It's an emotional moment, you know, but it was like, it was because I felt Mama Kay there. And I felt it was like a few quick messages. Yes, I approve of this marriage. Yes, I want Heidi to have my ring. I love you, and I gotta go. And then it's like, Choom. I'm like, I get this feeling always in this world that everything's so fast. I'm like, what are you busy doing? Like, what are you doing? But it's always like this quick thing, like, okay, I gotta go. I'm out. But that's what happened. And so I then explained that. And so it's really special. And then same thing happened about 2 weeks later. Is actually my dad's dad, my grandpa. And we were at his sister's house. So my great aunt and my great uncle. And we were at their house and we are just getting ready. Heidi and I are engaged and we're getting ready and we're talking. And all of a sudden I felt like my grandpa behind me with like his hand on my shoulder. I was sitting and he was like this and he was standing behind me with his hand on my shoulder. Just this feeling of like, I love you. And yes, I approve of this marriage. So it's like that together with I had prayed a bunch and it's like, man, if I mess this marriage up, it's all me and I'm a total loser because I got both sides, Marshall K, God himself telling me that this is like this happy union with Heidi. And so 20 years in, it's awesome. My wife is the best. Camille, you know her. Right. She's awesome. Yeah, she's perfect. Like she's practically perfect in every way. Not a strong singer, but
many other strong qualities.
And those are, to be honest, those are the only two experiences. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but while writing the book, I didn't necessarily have any experiences. I didn't have, grandma whispering, "Oh, write this scene." Or,
that you knew of because your idea, right? Because like I have this feeling, this intuition, this thought. Who gave you this? We don't know.
Yeah, take my class, Sean. Take my class.
I was just thinking that. I was like, he needs to take Elle's class.
Boy, that's interesting to think about. Who is perhaps whispering, guiding?
It's just enhancing your perceptibility.
Right.
You can become more sensitive to the other side if you practice. There's mechanics behind it. It's not like Elle studied this for years and she knows how to guide people from point A to here's how you increase your sensitivities. There's like colleges actually that have departments that focus on this. This is like a legitimate study.
80% of it is just that withholding of disbelief to the point where you're becoming sensitive. You're attuning your ear to something. And I always kind of use the analogy in those moments where everybody can hear them. People, a lot of people have these experiences like you have at select points in their life, like when you were getting engaged to your wife, like pivotal moments where you need an answer, right? And the answer is forthcoming. They're shouting because we're not necessarily always attuned to listen. So they have to shout, right? They have to yell. But when you can attune that ear, just like with the spirit, right? When you can attune that ear, suddenly they can speak softer.
I think it's important to realize that we can expand our perception. One of my favorite prayers to pray is, Heavenly Father, help me to know when my son Wesley, who passed away, help me to know when he's around, because I just want to know, like, if he's, that buzzing bee in the background and he wants to just drop in and hang out for a second, wouldn't it be fun if I could be aware that he's dropping in to say hi for a second? And so I have little moments where I was riding my little 4-year-old on the e-bike. And I had this little voice in my head. Well, it was Wesley. It was a little older than when he passed. And he was like, this looks like so much fun. I would love this. I'm so glad you guys are on the e-bike right now. This is a blast. It was like, oh, cool. He just wants to enjoy that moment with us. And so it's the little things, right? I think that they're part of the little things, and we look for them for the big moments. Like, will Wesley show up to his sister's wedding? Well, I'm sure he will. I'm sure he'll be there, and maybe I'll have a really strong feeling. I felt him show up for my brother's wedding, and my brother felt him show up at his wedding. He was like, Wesley was here today. And I was like, yeah, I felt him too. And my husband, Jeff, felt Wesley in the room that day, and he could point out, like, I feel him over there, standing over to the left of us. But it's not just the big moments. They can show up for me riding around on the e-bike with my other son, or like we had an experience feeling him jet skiing one time. They like to show up for the joyful moments too. I do believe we are entitled to, if we are willing to seek it. And of course, imposter syndrome might set in, like, who are you to think that you can know when your son is around? It's like that quote by Marianne Williamson, who are you not to be, brave, talented, fabulous? You are children of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We're not going to use these gifts to escape life and get totally sucked in. We use these gifts to appreciate what is already happening and to find joy in it.
I heard a story of a woman who she was very close with her mom, and she had lost her mom, and she was always close to her. And for a while there, after her mom passed away, she had a very close relationship with her, still communication. And then it kind of dropped off. And then she was praying, Mom, where are you? And then she felt this other voice like, well, I'm still here. And so, and she felt it was God speaking to her, like, oh, yeah, oops, that kind of thing. So that's another thing that's interesting to explore is like, where's that line? Like, I don't want to pray to my mom necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
but boy, would I love some motherly advice. She was a super wise woman and like crazy smart. And I could go to her for like a quick answer, and in fact, our very last text that we had together is powerful because I was asking her, what does it mean? Why would we be obedient to God? What does that look like? And it was just like pure insight. And it was all about love. We are obedient because we love God, because the things he's given us to do is to help us. It helps ourselves. It's not like some, guy telling us what to do. And we just have to be it's for us to level up ourselves. Anyways, and this is her last text to me. And I'm like, it's now like scripture to me because she like solidified it, but it's just amazing that, I had that kind of relationship with a person like that in my life. But I'll tell you, I haven't yet had that experience with her necessarily, but sometimes, if I'm on a long drive and if the seat next to me is open, I'll like move off whatever I had there to like make room just in case. I'm like, hey, Mom, if you're there, let me just wipe the crumbs off and,
You're
but
welcome. Sit right here.
yeah, it's wide open seat if you want to just hang out for 20 minutes with me. Maybe perhaps as I go on my own journey to become a bit more perceptive and open to that, looking for the bumblebees, learning to focus on that. I love that analogy. Fantastic.
Just the act of doing that. We're physical beings. We need sometimes to see that physical reminder. We need to have that notion to point out to ourselves, oh yeah, they could be here. I'm gonna leave that seat open just in case she wants to hang out and ride shotgun and have a conversation with me like we used to.
Well, thanks so much for being with us today, Sean. I'm excited for your new book to come out. So you're going to have to let me know when that happens. We'll put a link to your Amazon author page in our show notes. And yeah, it's been fun to have this conversation with you.
I appreciate it. It's fun being on this end and just learning from you, like, and your guys' experience and your wisdom and the point of view that you have. It's illuminating. It's research, by the way, too.
Thank you. We love sharing all the perspectives and the mind-opening experiences here on this podcast. So we really appreciated your time, Sean, and we encourage everybody to run out there and buy your books because I'm going to.
Oh, thank
Especially
you.
as a holiday gift, it's perfect.
Yeah, gift purchase. If you have anybody who's
Yeah.
interested in angels or, lightly religious material or just uplifting content, I get a feeling that's going to be found there. So
You can get the novella just for free. Like you can just go to
wet your whistle.
seanmarshall.com and it's just for free. Like I just want people to be happy. And read happy, feel good, uplifting fiction that maybe makes them start to think about this stuff.
Well, as always, please like and subscribe. It helps our algorithm get bumped the more you watch our episodes as they're released. And that will help us be able to share with more people who need to hear. If you'd like to get in contact with Camille and I, you can through our website or through our Facebook page, which is Through the Veil Community. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your stories if you'd like to share. If you'd like to book a reading or have questions about classes or anything, we can also be found there. And we will see you next time.
Bye. Thanks.